All right, well, this is my absolute pleasure. I am so lucky to sit down with these three wonderful leaders and partners in innovation and our ecosystem. So I'm thrilled to be able to begin a conversation with you folks. What I want to actually talk about, and we have experience from Hawaii. Jay has deep experience at the university, as well as Public Utilities Commission. Simon MacKenzie is the CEO of Vector, one of our global partners at the Elemental Accelerator, and we've been working with them specifically on innovation, how to deploy things, and I just have to say I'm amazed at the speed at which you do things, especially because you always tell us, well, we're not doing things fast enough, but you're one of the fastest companies I've ever worked with, let alone utilities. And then we have Carla Peterman, who's the commissioner from the California Public Utilities Commission, who's responsible for a number of the pieces that are really sort of dogging us here in Hawaii, and we want to learn from you and your experience there. So I'd like to start off actually by asking Jay, so welcome to week 3 on the job in the Public Utilities Commission as a new commissioner. I'd like to ask you what your top priorities are for this year.
Great, thanks, Dawn. I also want to thank, well, my distinguished guests here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. State Energy Office for putting this on and just the chance to talk with everyone here. As Dawn said, I've a few weeks back on the job. I'm happy to be back at the commission. And I've been asked by a lot of people, what are the priorities going forward? We have a number of major dockets, but as I look in the next 5 years, if I'm lucky to serve out this term, I really see 3 key priorities. If you look at the Hawaiian Electric's power supply improvement plans, there's proposed a major new round of procurement for utility scale projects. And this is a great time, this is a great opportunity for it's a buyer's market right now. If you look at the deals that have been struck here in Hawaii as well as on the mainland, a great opportunity in this field, but we've had some challenges with this process. At this point, we want to look forward and see how can we reform and see this next round of bidding bring in projects that are compelling deals for customers, and that on the regulatory side, we can look at and move forward on quickly. So I believe the commissioner, the chair said we're looking at kicking that, or looking forward to moving forward on those relatively soon as we get the power supply improvement plan decision out. As a last point, I also want to make sure that a key part of this will be on a broad scale throughout the state, and early community engagement will be a key part in helping make this round of projects and bidding successful. Just to touch on the other 2 quickly, the ongoing reform and transition of the distributed energy resources market and the opening up of new customer options is a lot of ongoing work at the commission, and I think we're going to bring diligence in seeing those reforms come through in the near future. And related to these 2, and especially important, I think we'll talk about a little more on our panel, in 2013 and 2014, the commission talked a lot about the reform of the utilities business model, reform of the regulatory processes, and how to better align the incentives of the existing utilities with these other opportunities I'm talking about in the beginning. So moving forward on those, all 3 of these are critical. And just a quick play, the other, we oversee the energy efficiency programs here, and continuing forward with the Hawaii Energy Program and their vision for the 2.0 version are all high priorities as I'm stepping back into this position. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so 3 plus 1.
3, they're all critical.
And so we're going to dig into 3 things on our conversation today. I agree, so utility procurement is key. In our conversation today, we're going to dig in specifically to the DERs and the utility business model and see what we can learn from some of the other jurisdictions you've worked in. And then finally, we're going to finish with innovation because, of course, it wouldn't be a panel that I'm moderating without touching on that. So, but I want to sort of talk through some of the DER pieces, and particularly with you, Simon, and thinking through how you think through technology. I mean, Vector's been very aggressive in actually looking at a suite of DER technologies and figuring out how your business model intersects with those technologies. Can you give us a little overview of what you've been doing there?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost it comes down to the mindset we have, which is very much around seeing disruption as an opportunity. In New Zealand, the market is actually structurally separated, so generators and retailers are separate from the networks. We're primarily the network operators. The other element that comes into it for us is probably 2 things which colleagues hopefully understand, but we don't actually believe that regulation can protect us in the long run. I think customers are actually where the choice is at. So we've also got a massive amount of network to build in Auckland because of the expansion. We're growing about just below the rate of a lot of Chinese cities. So given that expansion, we have fundamentally focused on how can technology and solutions for customers actually enable us to not deploy what I'd call the traditional network assets, make a much smarter solution for customers, and at the same time also grow our business. So I think when we get into that space, how we approach it is obviously through relationships like with the accelerator, which we've found fantastic, engagement with other companies up in San Francisco, but also Israel, where we see a lot of tech development. And so it starts with the first principle being, what would a customer expect from a market, that energy hasn't really served that well? How can we actually deliver those solutions, but integrated through an offering that actually makes sense for a network as well as the customer? Right,
okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think after we get through this first piece, I'm going to ask you to also dig into some of the technologies, because as I understand it, you guys have looked at a lot of sort of landscape of technology, and you haven't been satisfied with what you've seen, and have taken a really active role in developing some of that. So I'm going to come back to you for that. Right. But Carla, just to sort of set the stage a little bit with DERs and how you folks are thinking about the market. I know you have 3 different utilities that you're regulating in California, and they've approached DERs in slightly different ways. Can you talk about how you're approaching that?
Sure. Well, as a commission and as a state, we've been supportive of DERs, and we've incentivized energy storage at the distribution level, solar PV, electric vehicles. And what we've been doing with our utilities is distribution system planning with a focus on how do you facilitate more DERs. And in particular, when we're talking about how do you align that incentive for the utilities to invest in DERs, what we've realized, we want the utilities to see DERs as options, as an alternative to some of the traditional investment, as alternatives, for example, to distribution system investment. So we have a recent proceeding which is currently developing a pilot where the utilities are going to go out and procure DERs to meet distribution system needs, and in return for that, they will get a higher return on equity. And so we are looking at how do you make sure you're aligning that utility incentive with the market that we want to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So coming back to DERs, and I'm curious especially because we're actually struggling with this right now in Hawaii, and in terms of how we actually control DER. So I'm curious, in California, have you seen some interesting innovation in how to actually knit DER together as systems effectively, or is that an area where we're still looking for development?
We've seen improvements, but it's still an area where we're continuing to work on. I mean, I think one thing is a realization that we want to have these systems connected. So it's not just about having a smart inverter or a smart PV system. You want that PV system operating well with all the other loads in the household. And then the real, I think, emerging issue we're seeing is how do you coordinate what's happening with distributed energy at the distribution level with what's happening at the wholesale market. I have to applaud our grid operator, the CAISO, because they formed a working group really focused on this issue, on this interface. And with all the progress we've made on DERs, it's still remarkable the lack of visibility that the grid operator has into what's happening at the distribution system. So continuing to forge those relationships and really systematically figure out what are the rules that you have to have in place. Kind of along those lines, one of the things I'm personally working on are multi-use applications for energy storage. Because we do see opportunities for behind-the-meter energy storage to not only do bill management, but also eventually provide a distribution system resource or a wholesale resource. Turns out there's a lot of kind of rules that you have to figure out. Primacy of benefits, who's on first, who's on second. So we've been coordinating with the California ISO. We've both maintained dockets where we're identifying what are those rules. And so it's just going to take that type of coordination as we move forward to have DERs play a major role. But our behind-the-meter solar is 5,000 megawatts. So you talk about that's a massive resource. And that's 2.5 times what the San Onofre nuclear generating station was. And so really, this is not the fringe anymore. This is a resource that we've got to integrate into our broader supply planning.
Yeah, and Jay, how do you think that Hawaii sort of compares to California in this rulemaking in this market? Are we looking at California and seeing what they're doing? Are they looking at what we're doing? Are we learning from each other?
Both. And I can say I've been involved on both sides. And I agree with Commissioner Peterman in a number of areas. One, that still an area where technology is evolving, and in California and Hawaii especially, we're seeing the issue, well, and they're calling the interface between transmission and distribution. Here we just, since the system is so integrated and we don't have a system operator, it's all the system and the distribution level. We've been looking at least in my calculations, at 2 to 3 times the level of distributed resource in aggregate relative to the load on the bulk power system. So we've been looking at a lot of the same technologies and companies into how to better aggregate, provide visibility, and different levels and measures of control. And the technology is definitely emerging in there, but it still remains a lot of, ultimately regulatory questions. Again, coming down to, as you look at enabling some of these smart functions at the distribution level, there's a prioritization. Do we care about if there's a system contingency? How does that interact with anything happening on the distribution circuit? So I think sorting through a lot of those technical questions are the same things are happening in California. In Hawaii, we have a few different working groups, tackling the exact same questions. So I think certainly paying very close attention and working with a lot of the same people. But I'm also very optimistic that we have to tackle this. We're hitting some of the kind of bulk power system constraints at the moment, and so this is an area that we're going to forge through.
Yeah, and so these are the rules piece, but technology has a huge role to play in this as well, I think, in terms of helping solve some of these challenges and address things system-wide, because ultimately DER is a challenge of what's disaggregated versus what plays at the system level. So, Simon, can you tell us how you guys have been thinking about that and addressing that?
Sure, yeah, well, I guess from a first point is that we actually have installed a trial platform that basically connects all the DERs in a significant area of our network. So we've connected up solar, batteries, EV chargers, hot water control circuits, and it's fully integrated into our SCADA network. It's with our technology partner out of Israel, and we're now rolling that out across the rest of our network. That'll also provide connectivity into the wholesale market, as well as any other kind of sources that's got an IP address. So from our perspective, that technology is fundamental to create the platform to coordinate all the DER, but also integrate it with our network. It has an artificial intelligence component, which I think you take a big step forward if you can actually write a lot of the rules, but what we're also finding is a lot of the customers actually determine the rules themselves. And the other element of the platform is that we can provide right down to individual customer level that can actually talk, for an iPhone app, right the way through to a grid aggregated level. We're also working with a number of other utilities on providing that technology solution to them. So I think the really key point with this is it's not actually removing all the existing systems. This is basically a system that sits over the top of the existing system, so our SCADA system or battery control inverter connection system, anything like that, and actually talks to all those. Its origins come out of the defence industry, and put simply, it's actually now creating quite a different context about how we think about a network. It talks to all the smart meters. We've got smart meters deployed across New Zealand. And the other element which is really critical to it is probably the connectivity to the customers, but I think what's really making it, differentiating it is the fact that you can talk to market signals, you can talk to technical signals, and also customers can interface with some rule routines within it.
Yeah. So I love sort of the Kiwi understated approach that you just took to describing that, because when I heard you talk about it before, it was like, well, the Israelis had this system which was their sort of core defense system of systems, and then we couldn't find anything that was good enough and for what we needed, and we went to Israel and we're like, hey, let's do this with energy. Can we actually be the first utility to implement this with energy and then figure out how we can roll this out across the industry? So that's sort of my take on it, and yours sort of humble, understated, well, we found this out of Israel, and here's what we're working on. But I think that sort of approach to technology of finding the next frontier of technology to help enable the systems that we actually want to build has been really sort of fun to work with you guys on. And I'm curious too about sort of going back to this question of how you're incentivized to deploy something like this. So can you just talk quickly about sort of the structure of your business and how you think about DERs there?
Yeah, so I mean, very much, obviously, we have 10 different parts to our business. We've got the regulated side, which is essentially the networks, and then we've got unregulated. Smart metering sits in the unregulated side because in New Zealand it was a retail-led solution. We're also deploying that in Australia at the moment. But fundamentally, from a regulatory perspective, our regulator has just gone through the process of setting the input methodologies, which obviously determine how our structure works. We don't have any financial incentive per se, so we don't get a different level of return for undertaking these. We look at it more from a risk-based approach of saying, but probably the biggest frustration is we just do not want to end up investing in 40-year life assets anymore. The rate of growth and the change of technology just doesn't make sense to us. So we're incentivised from a risk perspective to lower the cost exposure in the regulated side, provide those technology solutions. They have obviously a better depreciation schedule, so we can get some accelerated depreciation from the regulator. Other than that, the incentive is more from being listed about how do we grow and actually by building these types of solutions take them to other markets.
So that takes us right into sort of the business of being a utility, and that was Jay's third priority. And I want to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10 in each of your geographies and markets, where do you think you lie in the public policy goals of the geography in alignment with the financial incentives of the utilities that serve them? So Carla, I'll start with you and then we'll head down the line.
I would say overall I give us a 7, but it does vary depending on what type of technology or what you're trying to encourage. So we've been very successful with the deployment, particularly of large-scale renewables, and our utilities are on track to surpass our renewable portfolio standard. We have a target of 50% by 2030. Mm-hmm. Already San Diego Gas and Electric is at 40-something%. So I think you've seen good alignment there. As I was mentioning earlier on distributed energy resources, I think there's still work to do. In addition to getting the utilities to see DERs as alternatives to their current investments, we still need to continue to address concerns around cost shift. Given the way we incentivize DERs, we want to make sure that the customers who don't utilize them don't bear an unfair burden of those costs, and that's something that we're continuing to work on.
Yeah. I'm on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, look, I think the New Zealand context is kind of characterised by generation retail being separated from the network side. I think that's quite an important context. I think the biggest ways that we see it is that as it stands at the moment, the regulatory construct is enabling us to invest, which is positive. The flip side is it's not, for want of a better word, prohibiting people carrying off what we call dumb investment. Mm-hmm. So we still see a lot of people in the market that are incentivised to just keep pouring in as much capital as they like, and they have a belief system they're going to be protected for 40 years. And then the second element is that they don't actually think that customers are going to revolt against them, which we don't think is credible nowadays. So I think in the regulatory construct, we should move back to a model which essentially looks at the type of investment that's occurring and actually saying, well, you can move to a much smarter technology space.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a 3 to an 8.
Yeah.
3 for investing in dumb things, and 8 or 9 for having incentives and ability to invest in the things that you think are future-proof and future-focused.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Don, I'm going to duck trying to put a number on this, but I'm going to say I'm very optimistic about where we're headed. And we're just having a conversation outside about it. When this discussion really took hold in Hawaii, I think one of the and there was a lot of interest in moving towards a incentive performance-based framework. There was still a significant disagreement among all stakeholders on really the direction of the utility, the focus of investments. And so from our working as staff at the time, it's really hard to enable that framework if you don't really have a clear idea where you want to go and what are the right types of investment. I mean, an essential element is trying to establish a revenue cap based on some understanding of those types of investment. So I think that dynamic has certainly improved and changed, and I think at the same time, a lot of the discussions in other states and jurisdictions has evolved on how to enable and incentivize and have utilities look at third-party provided DER type resources and enable these frameworks. So I think, we at the time, I think we're ahead in a lot of ways, and now we've been able to, we have the opportunity to learn, and that's, exactly where I think the chair in a number of times has referred to opening up and looking more into making advances in the performance-based and incentive-based regulation. And so, again, it's a shared priority here. And I think if you look at the dialogue in some of the various dockets, there's a move from the utilities as well as the other stakeholders to move in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess that's the question of like how we move in new directions, and to me, like that's where the innovation piece comes in. Because when I talk about innovation, it's not sort of what's the flashiest new gadget or what else can we do. It's actually how do we move people toward trying new things and testing new things and taking the kinds of risks we want them to take. So how do we define those risks and then create incentives so people can move in that direction? And I mean, Simon, you guys have actually thought about this from sort of a people perspective of how do you create incentives for your people to take the kinds of risks you want to take. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, and then we could talk about overall, if there were no constraints from the regulatory side, what would you guys actually want to see the utilities doing in terms of innovation and risk taking?
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, the whole focus has been in two key elements. One is around we see the biggest skill set for this century is around creativity and having an inquisitive mindset. Have a belief system that there's got to be much better ways looking outside of our industry and saying, what would happen if the likes of Uber or other businesses, how can you adopt their models into what we're doing? The dialogue with customers has been really important because, they actually got a real hunger to actually deploy technology. So, it's led to things like peer-to-peer trading solutions that we've put in place. I think that we've also obviously had to change the business. We've got a huge amount now of much more, a whole chief digital officer, brought a lot of digital capability into the business. But right across the business, it's not like we're saying one specific area is responsible for innovation. Everyone in the business is responsible for it, to whether it's someone in the comms department right the way through to accounting. So I think that's a really critical dimension. And the other lens which has been really important is looking through what's known as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and actually saying you can't look at our business through a lens of just what's been done historically in energy. You've got to have a much wider lens about affordability, social issues, and probably about 9 of the Sustainable Development Goals put out by the UN, and that's really changed the mindset.
Interesting. What would you like to see if there weren't constraints in terms of how the utilities approach innovation and risk-taking?
First, I want to acknowledge that our utilities do a tremendous amount of investment in research and development, and there are great innovations coming out of the utility. But I think it is important to make sure there are so many innovators out there that aren't working for utilities, and wanting to have utilities establish a marketplace and a forum in which those innovations can come forward and succeed. So there's no constraint on this, but one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of the innovators, new technology, look at energy storage, for example. People have great ideas, great projects, but they don't know how to actually work in terms of the utility procurement. That scale of engagement requires a really steep learning curve to understand how to execute those utility contracts, how to meet the different timelines, how to deal with interconnection. So when we did our energy storage targets, the first solicitation that Edison did for local reliability, every applicant, every bidder that bid in a proposal, the utility had to work with directly on their proposal. No proposal was perfect. And we had proposals from established companies and new startups. And I have to applaud the utility for frankly hand-holding the different applicants to say, this is what we need from you. And so that's something that they are positioned to do that we can't do as the regulator. We can set the procurement target, but ultimately you're going to need that type of one-on-one connections to help people ramp up. And so that's what I would encourage. What we can do as a regulator, and what they can also do, is have looser, more, I would consider it requirements in the beginning of deployment of new technologies. So in the first energy storage RFOs, we had looser rules around site control. Applicants didn't have to have site control in order to bid into the process. As we are maturing in terms of our understanding of procurement in that area, some of those rules are tightening. And so I think it's important for utilities to really think about what type of risk they're willing to bear versus what type of risk should be put on new developers and new market entrants in order to allow them to really flourish.
So you came full circle back to utility procurement like that.
Always.
Well,
The first one.
Just a couple.
Yeah,
I mean, I
on
think
innovation.
we're in a number of ways we're seeing tremendous innovation here already. I mean, it's the high energy prices and the needs for grid integration. If you look at what Kauai has done, the kind of pushing the boundaries on how to operate, relatively decent sized grid with large amounts of solar, and they've continually broken new boundaries. And their new goal is to turn off all their synchronous generators during the day and run entirely with solar. And very few places in the world, particularly with a decent amount of customer base, willing to take that risk, and they keep forging ahead. Throughout the state, the Hawaiian Electric companies have been strong partners with Dawn's program as well as others in pushing the technology side. And I think as Commissioner Peterman said, as we establish and unlock and create the right market structures, we're going to see tremendous innovation on the customer side. We've already seen the first wave of growth in rooftop solar PV, and I think just shows the customer choice paradigm when you get the mix right. We just see growth faster and in ways that we never intended or expected in the beginning. And so all makes me very optimistic and happy to be in this position to help move this along.
Well, we're happy that you're in this position too. And now our rapid fire final question, in 5 words or less, what's one thing you could use help with? Jay, I'll start with you and come back.
Sure, managing expectations. I think all that optimism, it's also not going to happen overnight, right? As I put it, probably no single order from the commission will create all this change. So I think having some understanding expectation that some of these things do take time, and time invested in the beginning actually helps you get to where you want to go faster.
Excellent.
I guess from my perspective, we're just always hungry to learn from others, and really having that mindset to actually connect with other parties, whether it's back in New Zealand to see what we do, but what we can learn from others, and obviously access technologies that can really assist us.
Helping us make sure that the technologies that we're investing in this future is accessible to everyone. One example of technology I really like is programmable thermostats to help with energy efficiency. And we're excited about a new research project, which is about how do you make those thermostats actually work without Wi-Fi so people don't have Wi-Fi can access them. It's a simple thing, but it really is going to bring in a big part of the population that doesn't have access to some of the advanced technologies into this energy world. So that's what we could use help with.
Awesome. Let's do it. The time is now. Please join me in thanking our panelists.